On this episode of Purposely Curious, I am joined with our friend from the finance savior, Salvador Bentolila. We discuss some aspects about financial conversations in relationships. Although we discuss issues that most couples go through, he makes a great point that this can also apply to several other type of relationships. So, is finance an important aspect for you when it comes to dating or in a friendship? Join us and get nice and cozy as this episode starts now. Hello everyone. Today on this episode of Purposely Curious, I have asked Salvador Bentolila to return so that we can kind of touch base on finances again. And he is from the Finance Savior, which you can find on Instagram and at thefinancesavior.com. So hello, Salvador.
Hello, Marie. Very glad to have this conversation again with you and touch on the topic of finances. I know you recently read the Rich Dad Poor Dad book, which is one of my all-time favorites, and I'm very curious to hear what your thoughts are. Also, we kind of in our last conversation towards the end, we spoke about how to manage your finances with your significant other, your partners, or your wife, husband, whoever that may be, as a something important to have in mind. So, very looking forward to discuss about that as well, and get your thoughts on it.
Yes. So on the last episode that we did together, he suggested I read. Now I'm gonna make sure I don't have my glasses on, but it's a Rich Dad Poor Dad, or is it the other way around?
Yes, it's Rich
Yes.
Dad Poor Dad.
Thank you. I wasn't sure. I don't have my glasses, so it's in my bookshelf, and I'm gonna make sure I got it right. But he sent it to me just like he promised, which I thought was very admirable because, he was a man of his word. I read the book. So when I received the book, I posted it on my Instagram, and I got a lot of feedback from a lot of people. Even my younger brother, who's 30, was like, oh, I read that book. It's, easy read. So I was like, oh, it seems that everyone's read the book but me. And like I told you, I had heard of the book, obviously, through the financial sector, but just never took the time. I don't know, maybe I don't know why I never picked it up, but I've read it. And it was a very easy read. I finished it in a week and a half, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. How was it for you when you read it?
Yeah, I was curious to hear that because I read this book about, I want to say maybe 7, 8 or 8 years ago, and up until that point in my life, I wasn't so much of a reader. And when I grabbed that book, I remember I read it, I want to say in 2 or 3 days. I read through it so quickly, and I think it was a combination of the way the book is written,
Mm-hmm.
which is super simple, or at least to me, and also how interested and passionate about I am about that topic. So both of those things contribute. I was also in vacation, so
Yeah.
those three things help in getting through the book very quickly. And from that point on, I just kept on buying more and more books about personal finance to kind of explore on other concepts that were touched upon in Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Yeah. So what would you say is the biggest takeaway for you from the book, as far as for your personal gain? Like, obviously it has a lot of information and how we process and how we think of money and how we approach money, but what do you think spoke to you the most that really changed your life from the book?
What really changed my mind is the concept of having money work for you instead of you working for money. So using money as a tool to build wealth rather than just seeing it as a money. And this goes hand in hand of the concept of active and passive income, of trading your time for money, which is what you do in your typical 9 to 5 job, or trading your or investing your money for more money, which gives you on the long run gives you this benefit of flexibility, freedom, wealth, and kind of buying back some time that it's a non-renewable resource for all of us. What about you? What was your main take. I think you have it a little bit fresher than I do.
Yeah, I would say the same. Obviously, I kind of already was familiar with a lot of the concepts, but he
Hmm.
broke the biggest thing is that he broke it down in like storytelling almost, which I
Yeah.
feel made it, for me, I'm like a visual person. I need to visualize it in my head. So if people are very
Okay.
like concrete and the way they say things, I really liked how I could imagine it in my head, everything he was saying. And the way he was saying it just made a lot of sense. My curiosity from this, well, obviously you want to make sure you're spending and investing your money wisely so that it works for you in the future.
Hmm.
But I thought it was very interesting to see his perspective of two different fathers. Obviously the one who's
Yeah.
not his biological father in the book was the one who I guess was making money work for him. So I thought I was more interested in that aspect of it, if that makes any sense. I don't know. Maybe I was reading too much into it, but I just thought it was, I don't know. I
So
learned.
is it is it because have you met people throughout your life that identify with this type of this profile of dad, of the rich dad? What got you so interested in that besides the concept of finances, of course?
Well, obviously, my parents always, the most extent financial education they gave me was like to pay my bills on time. So I feel like
Mm-hmm.
in that sense, I relate to the poor dad kind of thing mentality.
Okay. Yeah.
But then I had like friends who were investing, and or I would ask them questions, and even patients that were investors, I would ask questions. So it wasn't in particularly one person, but I felt like obviously this is normal for a lot of people. It's like you're living comfortably, you're making money, but you're not really investing it. And I guess that's the big takeaway is investing your money so that you can make passive income, and the
Right.
whole compounding over time. But it resonated with me, which, because I couldn't understand like if he was making the both these if these were characters he made up or it was in actuality true.
Yeah, I think it's based on a true story.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Because he says it like such a storytelling. Do you know what I mean? Like where I was like, interesting.
Oh, yeah, yeah. As far as I understand, it's based on a true story, and I think another point that he tries to convey, which I think also he's done it well, is the the trying to educate as many people as possible with financial literacy. Unfortunately, this topic is something that is not taught in school or in college. Maybe you take a course or two in college about financials, but really, as far as personal finances goes, you don't they don't cover a lot from my experience and from people I've talked to. So this book, I think, has made it through many people, especially in the younger generation, and has allowed them to get that at least that door into the financial literacy. And maybe this book doesn't cover everything, but it serves as an introduction and for people that want to take a step further, then pursue more and do more of their due diligence on their own about other topics. So I think the way it's uh, written, that it's based on a true story and it's kind of split into different lessons, it's easy it's made it easier for people to resonate with and then bring home this point of how important financial literacy is.
Very important. And what's some of the feedback from other people that have read it that, the book have you also gotten?
So everyone, it's funny. Most of the people that I speak to about personal finances, this book is they've always read it as one of their first book. It comes out it comes up in the conversation one way or another, and I did get a negative feedback recently, which surprised me, and the feedback was about the story the book being a little bit repetitive and perhaps and that the same message could have been told in a quicker way
Mm-hmm.
or in a shorter book. So that was surprising to me first time I hear that negative feedback, and I would have to read again through the book to see how much I agree or disagree with that. However, I think that now I'm a little bit biased because I am familiar with a lot more with many of the concepts brought up in this book. So to me, it can already sound more repetitive than when I read it for the first time. So I'll have to take another closer look at that. What about you? Have you received any?
Well,
Uh,
the feedback I did get was that it was pretty. Everyone who has read it, they felt it was one of their best books that they had read. But a lot of them, it was like their introduction to finances. So I feel like if it's an introduction to finances for people, it serves its purpose. But I think kind of like what you
yeah,
said, if you already know all this information, I can see why people could say that it's repetitive because he does repeat it, especially towards the end, the same things. But I think it's perfect for someone who's new to finance to memorize all this stuff, with repetition, right? So
yeah,
I don't know. Maybe that's why they felt like it was too repetitive.
yeah. And this person specifically is, as a profession, is in the finance industry, so that might be another reason why for that person specifically it sounded repetitive. But in contrast to someone who's completely
New.
new to it, it'll be it wouldn't be the same perception.
Yes. So this brings me to the topic that we talked about discussing, which is
Yeah,
couples and finances.
right.
Yeah.
Super, super important.
Yeah.
And,
So I want to actually ask you a question.
mhm.
I guess to kind of obviously we'll talk about the importance of it, but for example, for you in your personal life, without getting too personal,
Yeah.
how soon is too soon in a relationship to talk about finances, and how important was it for you, or is it for you, as far as is it a deal breaker or not if they're not good with it?
Yes. All good questions. So, uh, I think in terms of how when it's too soon, it depends on how fast the relationship goes, and I think that at least in my experience, before the relationship gets too serious, and with this I mean like getting engaged or getting married, and granted, this doesn't need to be with your couple, a husband or wife. I think this, for example, if you have a roommate, it also applies very well because it's someone you'll be sharing some of the expenses, or if you have a significant other or a family member that you live with. So please have in mind these all other types of people as we go through this conversation. And back to the original question. So, I think before the relationship gets serious, like getting engaged or married, then it's important to get a general idea of what the other person's mindset about money and saving and spending it and investing it is. And sometimes you don't. I find that you don't really have to ask a lot of questions to find out about this. You can start telling a lot and get a lot of information by their actions, their lifestyles, and just as the relationship matures, you start doing different activities and planning different things and going out to different places. And but I think it's by this type of events that you start understanding what approach this person has towards finances. And once the relationship gets serious in a point where, okay, now you have a joint financial responsibility, or you're sharing expenses, you're living under the same roofs, I think that's a good point where you get into the uh, details and actual numbers. Okay, this is how much I have, this is how much you have, this is how much I can, how much I can contribute to the house or the expenses. Likewise for the other person, and in that way, make sure there's an agreement between the two. That's from my experience. What about you, Marie?
Well, I've had 3 relationships. My
Okay.
first one, we were really young, so I think we just kind of didn't talk about it. Second one, we didn't really talk about it. The third one was my most serious, and we were very organized with money. But he definitely had the conversation with me about paying
Okay.
half for everything because
Okay.
I was kind of getting away with not paying for it for a while. But he
Uh-huh.
I had already started my. Remember, I told you like I thought I was going to lose my job, and I was already like saving money and
Yeah.
trying not to spend. So it wasn't hard for him to get me on the same page because I was already kind of 1 foot in.
Okay.
But I have had I can talk about I have had friends who I've given advice about money because they're completely not on the same page. But again, this is like conversations that we have now as adults versus when we're in our 20s, right? You don't really talk
Yeah.
about it. But now I'm single. I do believe that it's important. So I would want to, just like you said, have the conversation at some point. And then I think it's very important to try to be on the same page before finalizing anything and making legal stuff more formal, I guess.
Yeah.
And, you know, allowing them time if they're not willing to initially, allowing them time to kind of understand why it's important to you, and allowing them time to come around. Because some people come around later, right?
Yep.
So I think it's a tricky question, but it's very important, I think. I think the sooner you know or have an idea, the better. Because then you kind of know
Yeah.
what you can work with and teach each other, hopefully, to grow in that department.
Right. Yeah, totally true, and super important to that point, mostly because if we're talking about your partner, significant other, or husband, wife, whatever, you'll you'll be getting into a relationship hopefully for the rest of your life, and if everything goes well. So if the personal finance topic is something that both people in the relationship are not aligned to each other, then it can cause a lot of stress. It can cause a lot of extra expenses, and even of course put in danger the relationship, which would be super unfortunate if everything else, if all the other aspects of the relationship are going well, why put it in danger because of finances? So that's why it's super important. And then obviously, if the relationship does end up in separation, unfortunately, that can also be a super costly expense for both parties, and cause further financial damage. So that's why, back to your point, it's super important. And I also want to add to what I said before, that you can tell about people's attitude and approach towards money with with their actions, and going to different planning different things out and events and stuff. And that's true. And I also want to add that it's important to at least express your goals, like what you were saying before, just to see, um, or kind of get a gauge on the other person's reaction, or agreement on your goals, right? Because if you two have very different goals, then it might be kind of a flag or something that could be a potential conflict down the line. I don't think they need to be 100% aligned. Sometimes it's good to have a balance,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
but definitely there's ensure that they're within some range, I would say, so that the relationship can function.
Right. Right. So let's say you have a client who calls you for advice and they're learning, right? And they tell
Okay.
you, dude, my wife doesn't want to get on board or my husband doesn't want to get on board. We're already married, but we're trying to fix our finances. What advice would you give that person as far as how to approach the spouse that doesn't want to, or the spouse feels like, why are you nagging me? Why are you on top of me? Like what advice would you give that person as far as like how to approach that situation?
Yeah, so in terms of being on top of your partner or couple, I think that's super important. No one likes being looked over, especially with our finances, and especially at, at, at an age, I don't know, late 20s, whatever you start a relationship, you're already mature and you start to become independent. So I think what I would say is first to make sure that the financial picture of both as a couple is clear, and meaning who is going to be responsible for what expense, how much each one can cover based on their income or based on any maybe any assets or savings that they had prior. If maybe they're willing to share or maybe draft or well, if they're married, if they haven't gotten married yet, maybe draft a prenup. It's also something that helps. And then uh, always allow for some level of flexibility. Once you have established that agreement in terms of who is going to cover what, who is going to pay for what, and that's it. As long as both parties in the couple are responsible and things are paid for, the relationship will flow without having the need for either one to be on top of the other in terms of what they need to be responsible for, and also allow some wiggle room between in terms of not every dollar that is made as a couple needs to be saved or invested or devoted to a common to a common goal or spent in a necessary expense. We have to understand. I think it's important to understand that every person is different. Every person has different interests and goals, and they like to spend their own money differently. So
Mm-hmm. Correct.
allow a little bit of wiggle room in terms of each person's income, so it can be completely disposable and spend it in whatever they want without you having to worry about it and being to and need to constantly ask, hey, what did you spend this on? If one person is likes to shop every month for clothing, and the other person is a complete hoarder and penny saver and doesn't like to spend anything, then that's totally fine, as long as all the other goals and expenses are being met and agreed upon. Then I think that's totally fine. That flexibility helps relieving stress and avoid any friction as far as related to finances.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point. There's every relationship is different. So you may have, like you said, someone who likes to shop and that makes them happy, and then the other person hoards everything. So
Yeah.
you also have couples who pay all the bills together, but then have their accounts separately, and that works for them and they're okay with it, right? Then you have those couples that they put the money in, but they only one person manages it and they're okay with that as long as it works, right? And it's not causing friction. There's no right or wrong.
Right.
But you also mentioned something, and that's a prenup. And it's good that I'm glad that you brought it up. I wasn't necessarily thinking we were going to talk about it, but now I want to. It's very controversial. A lot of people love the idea because they come in with so much. And then some people see it as a prenup is a bad thing. Like you are assuming that this is going to end. And, like some people get offended if
Yeah.
they are asked for a prenup. Have you heard of Jessica Simpson?
Yes.
Yes. So I had read her memoir,
Okay.
and her first marriage, she had gotten married to Nick Lachey from 98 Degrees, the singer, and he wanted a prenup. And she said
Okay.
in the memoir that she was so offended because at the time he was bigger than her. And then she
Okay.
became huge, and then she was bigger than him. And so her biggest regret, she said, was not getting the prenup because she ended up losing a lot after.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just interesting because, some people have prenups and are always married, never divorced. But that's always kind of like a stigmatized subject, is people are all for it, and then some people take offense to it that you're assuming that the relationship's going to end. So what's your opinion on prenups?
Yeah, it's very personal. I've heard also both, let's say, both positions. And my take, I think I would take it with on a case by case basis, depending on how the relationship, on it's hard to say, but just
Mm-hmm.
based on kind of gut feeling where the relationship, or how much potential the relationship can have, how much of a common background you have, how aligned you are in terms of your lifestyle, your goals, and I do see the point that coming with a prenup is kind of assuming that it is gonna end, but maybe sometimes it's necessary. The same thing could be said about insurances, for example, when you have any type of insurance like car insurance, or you you could say that you're also assuming that the car is going to have some type of damage, and
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't, but at the end you're just protecting yourself for something that may or may not occur in the future. With prenup, I can see how it's a little bit different because you're dealing with people in a relationship, and feelings, not strictly just numbers and assets. But I think that would be my take. Just do it on a case by case basis based on the potential, the relationship, how aligned both parties in the couple are. How
Yeah.
does what do you think about it?
I agree with you. I think it's on a case to case basis. I have had friends who were offended when they were asked for it. And then I have had friends who both agreed it was for the best because they don't feel like they're going to get divorced, but in a country where, example, they say it's over 50%, they're more realist.
Hmm.
So they felt, if we do split, which and they're still together, they've been married for 10 years, but they were like, at least it'll be easy in the divorce and not dragged out. That was their mentality. But I see more people getting offended over it. But I do believe, like you said, it's on a
Yeah.
case to case basis, and but I thought it was interesting how my other friends, they took it as, if we choose to divorce, we want it to be quick and easy and soft and split evenly, kind of
Right.
like whatever they agreed to. And yeah, she wasn't offended, and neither, and he
Oh,
was,
okay, that's
yeah.
great.
So I mean, she brings the
Yeah, and
same as him. They both were pretty well off, but
uh
I just thought the way they looked at it was different.
okay. Yeah, because there's also the another way to look at it a little bit simpler is that before a relationship happens, each party has their own savings, assets, whatever, and then once the relationship starts, ideally you'll be contributed commonly to any type of joint account or joint savings and start building assets that belong both to you and still maintain whatever you had before, and so at that point the simpler approach is, even if your assets grow over time, is whatever was yours before the relationship is still is yours. Whatever we made after the relationship, then it just gets split by half, and that's it. I mean, it's another simple approach to do it. If you wanna see like why should one party take off the other party's assets that didn't belong to the first party before the relationship started. So
Mm-hmm.
in that way, I think yeah, maybe one party will end up with more assets than the other, but maybe that's also because that party had more assets before the relationship, or they grew more throughout the relationship, which is not dependent on how the relationship went or how much income anyone's make. So that's another simpler approach that can be taken if you think that there's enough confidence in the relationship and between the parties to kind of have that understood agreement, then it's another approach to avoid a prenup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Good take.
Yeah. And yeah, and I think the other thing I was saying before is also that it applies to, for example, roommates. It's typical with people, students and at the university on college. You're sharing dorms, or you're sharing an apartment, and you have common expenses, and sometimes finances can also cause tension between roommates. And maybe if you found your roommate through Craigslist, or uh, it's not someone you care about so much because you just got to know him or her recently, then it's it is important, but not so much as if as if you're sharing an apartment with someone that you truly care, love, and or maybe an old friend from school, from back home. And the last thing you want to happen is a small expense to damage the relationship, although many times they come back to reality and to normal very quickly, but sometimes they can be devastating. And so in those type of relationship, it's also important to be very clear. Okay, who's going to afford what? How are we going to divide the expenses? Do you have a bigger room? Then you should. Are you okay to pay more? Do you have a bathroom in your room? Are you okay to pay more? Think sometimes also different roommates want different things. Maybe one of the roommates will want a cleaning service once a month for the apartment, and the other roommate will not want it. So what do you do in that case? There's always this the food, and maybe they have different diets, and they
Mm-hmm.
not all of them consume the same product. So how do you go about these things? What sharing costs and expenses? Also, another important thing to keep in mind when in those relationships. I don't know if you've ever lived with roommates and have any experiences to that you can relate to in this sense.
So I've never had, let's say, roommates. I did live with my ex at one point.
Okay.
We cooked differently, so it was kind of like I would buy my food and he would buy his food.
Okay.
And then if I ever wanted something that he had, I would have to replenish it. Like, but I haven't had any. I didn't have any issues. We split everything, but we discussed everything. If that makes sense. If
Okay. Yeah,
he,
that's the
yeah,
important thing.
yeah. So we were very organized with money together. Even on our trips, we were very organized. We had like payment plans if one paid and the other didn't. Up front, so it was like very organized. But I've never had roommates, so I've always kind of lived
Oh,
alone, and that's
okay.
maybe one of the reasons why is because I'd rather not split things, I guess. Um,
Yeah, yeah. It can be it can be a conflict many times, and some people, just rather um, live alone independently, like in your situation, for example, and avoid those cases at all.
yeah. The other thing too, you kind of mentioned, we were talking about it could be with friends and families, right? Relationships. How do you
Yeah,
feel about lending money to family?
lending money to family.
It's a tough
I'm
one,
gonna
right?
I'm gonna repeat my answer. It depends on case by case
Yeah.
basis, but most I want to lean myself to yes all the time. I think family is family, and ultimately you have to care and for them and provide as much support as needed, even if it means you sacrificing something, or maybe you don't know when you're gonna get your money back. So I think your family, it's something that you definitely have to care about. And in my case, I think if any of my family members would ever be in need, I would, with open-handed, do it with no questions asked. What about you?
I feel it's not for. There's certain things I won't do things for.
Hmm.
I will, like, if my parents have ever needed money or anything, gladly. But when it comes to like my credit, I usually say no.
Oh,
And this is for, I've been asked, I'm not talking about my parents per se, but I've been asked by family and I always say no. And that's just
like
something
using.
being a cosigner. That's where I draw the line and I say no, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, because then you assume the responsibility as well.
correct. If they don't pay, it's on you. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So
Okay.
that's one thing that I know
Okay.
I've been asked and I've said no.
Interesting. Yeah, I was thinking more of when you asked the question about strictly lending,
Oh,
a
yeah.
set amount of money, like not necessarily like on a for a
Yeah.
30-year loan or whatever,
Yeah.
just lending a specific amount of money and then them repaying back at some point.
Yeah. So if I have ever lent my parents money in the past, I've never assumed that they would pay me back. Because I
Hmm.
do it because they're family.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I agree with you in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
If if
Perfect.
if they if they were to pay me back, it'd be like a plus. But I've never told them to pay me back. So
Yeah.
for them, yeah, I would.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. Great. So we spoke. Okay, I think we spoke about some of the main points about reach out for that book. Then we touched upon personal finances, how to manage them with your couple, partner, significant other, and drill down a little bit into prenups, and and then also lastly we spoke about how to manage them with your roommates or close family members, which I think are very interesting and topics that can be controversial at some point. So I'm glad we discussed them and offered the audience some different point of views in terms of what how these situations can be approached.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, without getting too personal, are you financially able to communicate with your significant other?
Yes, absolutely. And this happens mostly kind of, how do I say, what's the right word, like tacit, implicit,
Mm-hmm.
and like without having the need to communicate too much, because like I was saying earlier in our conversation, there's that understanding of what the common and individual goals are, who's responsible for what, and after that, there's trust that each one is doing what they have to do without having the need to um, micromanage, to say in
Yeah. Yeah. And
a
that's
way. And
the.
of course, if there's a what?
No,
Sorry.
go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say that, of course, if there's a significant change in each one's life, like uh, a different job or a reduction or an increase in salary or even a common thing like a higher expense now, then there's a time, that brings up the opportunity to revisit, sit down again, and see what adjustments need to be done.
Yes. And I was going to say that's the type of relationship we all aspire to have. And it's, again, it comes down to open communication, understanding of the other. And it really comes down to communication, communication, communication. Because,
Yeah.
like we said earlier, we could all have different levels of where we're at financially, and it doesn't mean that I'm not going to come closer to your level, right? And vice versa. It's just understanding and working together as a couple to meet on that like medium where it's like both needs are being met and both are being understood, right? So that you can come to this collective agreement that works. And that's the goal that I think every relationship should have, for financial issues and burdens not to be an issue later. It's just being an open book with each other. So,
Yep.
yeah, I
Exactly.
agree. Well,
Yeah. So
congratulations.
thank you. Hopefully, everyone listening is also in that state, and if not, that they get to it quickly and without trouble.
Yes. So I appreciate you coming on again and to tackle this couples conversation. I thought it was pretty cool. So we'll have to
Yes,
do
yes.
another one in the future and see what other what feedback we get on this one and see what other stuff we can touch on next time.
Totally, exactly. If any in the audience that anyone listening, if you have a topic that you really like us to speak about, or maybe something that you want us to dig deeper into it, definitely let me or Marie know through our Instagram pages, and at the Finance Saver or at Purposely Curious, and we'll definitely prepare for it and bring
Yes.
you another episode.
Yes. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. And we will see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
That was episode 64 of the Purposely Curious podcast. Make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on most podcast platforms, and follow us on social media at Purposely Curious on Instagram and at Purposely C Pod on Twitter. That's Purposely, the letter C, Pod. Until next time, you know what to do.